Okay, it is recording now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rick.
Yep.
All right, well, welcome this morning. Appreciate everybody being here. Want to start out and let everyone know that we have a couple of new members that came from our list of volunteers with the through the process we did a month or two ago. And so we have, going down the screen, we have Lynn King. Lynn, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Lynn King. We have lived in the Clemson area for now almost 40 years. About probably 25 years or so ago, I chaired the Camelot Homeowners Association as we led the fight against the rezoning of what was the Cheatham property, which later became Patrick Square. And then maybe 2 decades ago, chaired the Clemson Chamber of Commerce and was one of the voices for small business. So I've sort of looked at life from both sides now, I guess. We're currently retired and live in the old Calhoun district of Clemson. So I look forward to being a part of this. So thank you.
Good. And then we have Aaron.
Hey, I'm Erin Bluvis. My maiden name is Schwadler. If you know my parents, they still live in Clemson. We moved here in '85 and they still live in Monaco Estates. My husband, who works for Clemson, and I work remotely for USC. We live in Sedgefield with our 3 kids who go to Clemson Elementary. And this is my first time participating, other than the ClemsonNext surveys and that type of thing. This is my first time participating in any sort of official committee.
Yeah. Well, thanks for not putting your employment situation and who you work for on any of the information, because we might have accidentally had you get kicked off the list, but we're glad to have you. And Peter.
Hey y'all, Peter Hyatt. My wife and I and our 4 kids, we've lived here in Clemson for almost 7 years now. And I work at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry. I'm the director of campus ministry, which is right across the street from the tennis courts. I'll say next to the old Mellow Mushroom. That's how the old people know. And just happy to help and serve.
All right. Well, thank y'all. We're glad to have you. I did send y'all some links and hope you've gotten access to the Google Drive and that kind of thing. And today, what we are working on is 2 things. One, we have been discussing for the last week, a couple of weeks, this committee's recommendation to Planning Commission and Council, who are having a work session. I think it's next week. I can't remember. I can't keep all my meetings straight now. To talk about the pending ordinance that we have in place. There is a pending ordinance or consideration of a pending ordinance at the moment that does away with all multifamily housing across the city. Our discussions have been that probably goes a little bit too far for all multifamily housing. And last week, and there was a document that I shared with everybody that was, kind of initial thoughts about what we had discussed in the committee, focusing that idea on our commercial areas. Our commercial areas are currently designated as non-residential areas, but the way that developers have been able to accomplish larger, dense projects in our non-residential zones is that residential is allowed under mixed use as a conditional use in our commercially zoned properties. So where we are at the moment is that recommendation B, that we either change it from a conditional use to a special exception, which gives it a higher bar to cross before it goes, or disallow it completely, take that off of the table of acceptable uses, that residential, take any residential use off the table of acceptable uses in our non-residential zones, which intuitively makes some sense. And then anything that would come forward as that included housing and residential in our commercial zones would have to come through as a planned development, which then it gives developers flexibility, but on the city side, it also gives the city total control over the approval of that process. Okay, so it has a little bit of benefit both ways. And in the strategic plan, the plan identifies some catalyst areas and some important areas throughout town. And the idea is to create overlay districts within those catalyst areas that would lay out a vision and kind of rules of engagement and ground rules for those specific areas, what the city is willing to or would like to see there. So as property owners and developers would bring forward ideas for PDs, that that it would need to fit in with that vision for those specific areas. So for example, Uptown, what we're calling Uptown Clemson, that's from basically the traffic light at Allen's Creations and Hubbard Young Pharmacy up to Walgreens and left down Kiowee Trail. That area would have an overlay, and we're actually talking about doing a charrette and a redevelopment process that we get input from stakeholders, property owners, the public, that would outline, all right, here's what's important to us here, here's what we'd like to see, here's what we don't want to see in this area. And so as developers assemble property there, they would have to come in and propose projects that are within the scope of kind of that vision for what the remainder of our downtown area becomes under redevelopment. So does that make sense as far as where we are? Particularly quick overview for the new folks on the call.
Yes.
Is that city council right now pending ordinance, and we need to do something. So the moratorium is done and over. Anything that is has put the brakes on the on any big high density development is under this pending ordinance right now. So if something doesn't happen with a pending ordinance, that puts us in a position to have a little bit better control in how high density, largely student focused development comes forward, then we'll be back to the pre-moratorium situation where mixed use can come forward as a residential use in our commercial zones where you can get that kind of density. Major danger being that our commercial zones, because of the market, become monolithic student housing with empty ground floor retail, which doesn't make for a healthy city. So that's the goal. In your Google Drive, and again, because I'm on my iPad, I don't think I can share this. If you look in your Google Drive, if you have that in front of you, under ClemsonNext, in that main Clemson, under ClemsonNext, there's ClemsonNext implementation and a document. Oh, someone's sharing it. Thank you. Who did that for me? Someone did it. This is the document. Who did that?
I think it was Fran.
Okay. Hey, Fran, if you can scroll up to the top, whoever shared the document. Hey, Fran. Fran's in his own, there he goes. So this is what we wrote. Fran made some comments. A couple other people have commented and said that they were, generally okay with this. Started with the concern about that goal of the committee. Then thinking that the current ban on all multifamily housing be done away with as a, across the city, that probably goes too far. And that this is a starting point to make sure that we address the major concern that led to the moratorium and the strategic planning process: high density, student focused housing plus traffic were the two things there. And then Fran, if you can go down a bit further, actually, yeah, there with number one. So that's where we start with that residential use in our commercially zoned non-residential districts be changed from a conditional use to a special exception and or limited to a density of 56 beds per acre. 56 beds per acre is currently what is allowable in our RM4 district. So that's the highest density that we have allowed in a residential district. So if we are still going, and allowing for some residential mixed use, that could be a starting place for a density and a density that's lower than what the original moratorium allowed for. The original moratorium was 200 beds or more there. So we would still be south of the moratorium. And that any project that proposes a higher density come forward through the plan development process. And again, that gives the city complete control over the approval of the project. Other things, requirements for the PD in catalyst and overlay districts, that it must conform to the vision, goals, size, character, use, architectural standards outlined for that district. Where student housing is allowed, that we set a maximum occupancy. There's been some discussion that even though, we have bedrooms, we don't have a limit on the number of students that are in those bedrooms. So, you could dogpile, 4 students into a bedroom if you put bunk beds in there, so that the actual occupancy density might be much higher than the bed density. So we need to clarify that. And that we have a minimum acreage that's set for each catalyst area. So we might say, for a PD to come forward with the mixed use, including housing, that it's got to be 4 acres or 5 acres of property, so that that allows for bigger projects that then can meet the wider, range of goals that we have for an area. That outside of it becoming all student housing with ground floor retail, that's lease rates are typically probably too high, difficult for businesses and small businesses to pull off anything in those areas. Some specific information about the downtown catalyst areas and overlay districts, that they should require a Fran, was that you that just stopped?
That was me. You want it back?
Well, I think we're okay at that point because there's not a ton more there. But it was downtown catalyst areas that they truly should have a multi-dimensional mix of uses outside of the student housing and empty retail, and that other uses and other appropriate uses be included, like multiple types of housing are marketed to multiple markets, retail, commercial, office, professional, civic, public uses as well in our downtown areas, and minimizing the impacts of development in all commercial districts where it might be allowed, that we do a better job of minimizing the impacts where commercial higher density meets, in many cases, our lowest density of R12, R20, and other residential uses. So better job of buffering and softening those edges a bit. And then we've also had the discussion about considering specific zoning requirements for purpose-built student housing. So when student housing is included, having its own set of requirements for that. All right, so with that, questions, comments?
So Bob, this is Fran. I thought David's comment about the difference between the special exception in terms of who has to approve that, the BZA, I think, has to. Do we want to consider that process and maybe even tweak that though for approving special exceptions? Because I think David said now that just goes to BZA, and they're pretty strict in terms of how they apply guidelines. You know, the few meetings I've attended, they're really limited and public comments limited. There's kind of other regulations. Maybe David can clarify. I think he's the one who said that though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I looked it up. I mean, I was on the BZA years ago, right? And so we have very limited guidelines as to how we can act and what we can consider. And I saw nothing in there that dealt with the BZA addressing special exception considerations based on density or use. So, you know, there's things about aesthetics in there. There's things about environmental impact. That's how they define impact. There's things about noxious influences. But so the BZA has very specific guidelines because that's a quasi judicial body. And so on how they can act. So I think we need to make sure that the BZA has the tools, if we're going to go that route with special exception, to actually control this kind of housing. So that was my main issue. And then the other thing I brought up, go ahead.
I think, David, doesn't BZA also have very strict public input guidelines?
It's a very regimented process. Yeah, right. So, I mean, you have to, I think again, it's been a long while since I've been on the BZA, but my thinking is that there's no discussion in the public input after once the issue comes to a thing, you have to make your comments ahead of time. I may be wrong on that. That's, like I said, it's been a long while, and Todd would probably have better guidance on that. But yeah, it's a much more structured process because it's quasi judicial. So, and the other thing is then the challenges for that go to court. There's no challenge. So, that might set us up for some legal battles, more so maybe than others. But I mean, of course, a developer with deep pockets can challenge anything. But
This is Todd.
So it's just something. Go ahead, Todd. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I read your comment yesterday, and it's something we had on staff had thought about too, that while the BZA process, and we could structure it any way we wanted to, it currently does allow for comment and testimony. But I put in the chat box here that we might be better served to have the Planning Commission approve this for two reasons. The main one being that the BZA they are much more focused. They're much more limited in what they do and how they do it. And that they may not be as in tune with the planning issues associated with this type of approval. And I think that there's a way that we can structure this, whether we call it special exception or just require approval by the Planning Commission, that might be an option. Still having a layer of approval, but to direct it to the Planning Commission instead.
So what would we call that then, Todd? Would it be a special exception? It wouldn't be a special exception then, right?
No, we would just make it a condition of use that it has to be approved by the Planning Commission. We're creating this ordinance or these standards for each these catalyst areas, and that we could just make that one of the conditions, that if you're going to be over 56 beds, that it has to be reviewed by the Planning Commission. And while currently the planning commission only has final authority over naming streets and subdivisions, that we could amend the ordinance to either give the planning commission final approval for these reviews, or they would make the recommendation like they normally do and it go to council for final approval. So there's several ways to do that, but we can structure it anyway. And under because we're going to be doing these as I understand it, as catalyst areas, that we will be creating a new set of standards for each one, and we can just make that one of the standards. So we can call it whatever we want, special approval or even special exception, but that special exception goes to the planning commission instead of the BZA.
And the other thing is, if we simply decide, and this is a little bit bigger change, if we were simply to decide to not make it a special exception and have anything that comes forward in our commercial areas that proposes, just take residential off the list of acceptable uses and conditional uses, and have it, anything that has residential above 56 beds an acre comes forward as a PD, then you have the ultimate control over the approval process. And that, again, the strategic plan the strategic plan being incorporated with the comprehensive plan, and the overlays for those catalyst areas become, again, the rules of engagement for those specific areas that we outlined that would have those policies. So I've added a number 5 under the in the Google Doc, that just trying to outline this. So David and others, if you can look at that, it's really quick. BZA regulations and/or the vision goals, et cetera, for the catalyst areas and redevelopment areas would need to be considered, including size, density. Tom had a good comment in the chat, I think. Environmental, social, and cultural impact as a way to think about not just our residential areas, but our historic neighborhoods, African-American neighborhoods, so on and so forth. If we go with a special exception, and may need to consider having the planning commission in that approval process. Okay, so that's there, and could probably be worded better than my, trying to type as we talk. So I think 2 things. I think Jackie had her hand up. Jackie, did you have a comment? If you're still there.
Yeah, yes, I'm still here. Have any of those plans been approved? I was listening last week while I was traveling, and somebody was said that either the comprehensive plan or the strategic plan or the white paper, have any of those been approved? That's just a quick question.
Well, the comprehensive plan has been, we do have a comprehensive plan in place. The white paper has not been approved yet, but that's one of the things that we are working towards, and we are working towards a incorporation of the white paper strategic plan recommendations being incorporated into the comprehensive plan as well. So we're working on these things simultaneously.
Okay. As we endeavor to close these loopholes, again, some of the recommendations that were brought forward in those papers are quite good, and I think should be implemented, but I don't think we can do anything if they're not approved. Do we have a leg to stand on? I know we're shifting away from the BZA, and I know that's an important discussion process, but where's the foundation? We have to have a foundation in order to move forward, so we avoid the legal issues.
Yeah, so I think we've got that with the things in the current comp plan get at some of these, plus the white paper, which again we've got to get as soon as that strategic plan and those recommendations in the white paper are approved, we need to, I think we're okay there. Also, you know, it's recognized that things and situations do change, and you know, cities and county and municipal governments do need to be responsive to those types of issues. So, like I said, I think we're okay, but you're right, we do have some things going on simultaneously. Christine had her hand up.
No, that was a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm having computer issues too.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts on the spirit of this recommendation? Again, the one place that we you know, have some either ors here, that we could make a stronger recommendation or we can leave it as is for the planning commission and council, is the idea special, you know, condition, moving it from a conditional use, residential from a conditional use to a special exception, or moving it to a, you know, taking it off the books in commercial districts, and anything that's over a certain density under mixed use then has to come, you know, setting the maximum density at 56 beds an acre, and it has to come forward as a planned development. There's a kind of combination there.
The other thing, Bob, that I had put in the chat was, if we're going to go the planned development route, which I think that's actually a strong approach as opposed to a special exception, but I think we do need to reduce the area requirements in the PD. I mean, I think what we want to promote is small, incremental, organic growth of development downtown over large scale purpose-built student housing projects. So the idea that someone might go into a parcel or two downtown, build a smaller project with mixed uses, commercial below and housing above, is much better than a macro project. And so what we don't want to do is prohibit that small, incremental, organic growth of projects that more than likely would inherently be less impactful and a better fit for the scale of our downtown. Because currently the area requirements almost mandate, you know, a significant developer coming in and doing it.
And there could be, again, I think, you know, we might be getting into a bit of a gray area, but I mean, I think we could have different, you know, with our overlays, we could have different levels, because you know, for example, if you think about our catalyst areas, the catalyst areas recommended, and you know, if we decide that those are what we're going forward with, like the Clemson triangle would be extremely difficult to have that occur with under that idea of smaller PDs. Whereas that would take a bigger project, because it needs to happen from the macro level to get green space and a park protected there, some workforce housing to happen, as well as what might be allowable with some student housing and commercial as well. You know, that is financially and economically, if you limited it across the board, you know, to or wanted to only have small things happen, then that would be an issue. So I think what we need to look into is, can there be different size requirements based on different overlay districts? Because when you do have a multi-dimensional goal like the Clemson triangle catalyst area, that's a different type, as opposed to what we might want to see along 93, like where Peter's sitting right now. You know, for example, if something were to happen there, you know, probably smaller scale, or in our current core of downtown. Does that make sense? David, did that make sense? That there's
Yeah,
different, there's
yeah,
gonna
I didn't
be
want to be
different
the only
scales
one
to it.
reacting.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what other people think.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear Tom's opinion from a developer's viewpoint. I mean, he knows what we're after. So can you weigh in on that, Tom?
Yeah. It's kind of tough because what a developer is going to want in the upper college area is to get a hold of as much property as possible, assemble it, and build to whatever regulations that are allowed in order to get that density. And so you either have a really small, compact project that's really tall, which you can't do right now, or it's spread out. I think if it's an overlay and you're able to control how they make it, how big it gets or how it looks, because David's right there. That's where it's going to be a big project. If you say you have to have 3 or 4 acres, you're going to limit probably a lot of different development types or even companies. It's going to be somebody that's got the deep pockets and and then what Bob's saying is correct on the other side is you're going to need something that with a lot of flexibility and bigger size. So I think we really got to drill down on making sure that there's always going to be a way to kind of penetrate the whatever we're going to try to do to keep these things from being so big and so imposing. And one of the things I'm doing is asking some of the national folks that I talk to and say, hey, what's the next what's your next step, knowing that a lot of these college towns and smaller cities are trying to prevent these big projects. What are you seeing? And I'm trying to follow that and kind of report back. But and then on the special exception, what a lot of these national developers will do is they'll go right to the special exception, I think, which is going to cause, create a lot of drama like you see in the past, because they're not going to hesitate if they have to spend, $20,000 or $30,000 going through different committees. They're professional at getting things approved, and they think they can, and that's what they're going to try to do. So this is where the details, I think, are going to be really, really important, because people are going to try to come in and slice it up any way they can in order to get that density. And again, they're willing to pay huge amounts for property in order to get this density. So I don't know if that helped or not, but it's tough right here. Right here is tough.
Sure. And how's the best way to achieve what we want?
I think it's a combination of things where I think the good thing, you don't allow it as a conditional use in a commercial area. That's a big step forward, because I think, and Todd can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what the dockside developer defaulted to. He said, hey, I'll do a PD and I'll do all this. And he couldn't get it done. So he came back and said, all right, I'll just use the zoning that I'm allowed. And he went right to commercial, the 40-foot height, and he just spread the project out and made it, more of a kind of a linear project. And so if this is in place where it's not a use anymore, then I think you're going to default to the PD, where you have a lot more control. But I think it's important, like David said, is, where do you make it too big or too small? Because, what you do want to encourage, I think, is a developer to come in and say, I want to build something for non-students. I want to make this commercial area viable. And I might sell, it may not be a for rent project. I might sell these to retirees or, younger professionals that work in the area. you want to encourage that because if you don't, you know, those are smaller projects because we just don't have the market absorption for something like that. Whereas all these really big projects are built for rent. And there's a lot of absorption because you have a lot of college students, obviously. So I think especially in some of these overlay districts, you're going to have some flexibility to encourage development that is not just student, which is exactly what I think we're saying that we want.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So that's the idea of like that, you know, this is step one to put the brakes on the ability to get the super high density, you know, largely student focused housing in these areas. And then the development of the policies, vision, goals, so on and so forth for our catalyst areas, catalyst and overlay areas. Again, like, you know, it could be, we probably need to look, you know, comprehensively at our commercial districts and then, you know, some of our residential districts as well. But starting with our commercial districts and saying, here's this piece, uptown, here's what, you know, our vision is for this area. And again, the, you know, we can get the policies right to get at the vision for each of those areas. Okay. And I think that's what we've got to come to through the process, beginning with like a charrette redevelopment process for uptown that will outline what those, you know, things are. What would we allow from a density standpoint? How do we, you know, again, do some of the things Tom was talking about, if that's what the goal is? How do we protect the lakefront, you know, along Kiowee Trail and even down 123 as an important aspect of what our downtown is and community could become as an asset there? And what are the gives and takes with density, types of housing, and all those other considerations that are in, you know, a lot of those are in the white paper that get us a better product and get us a better, you know, big projects come forward through a new process where, you know, we almost create a little competition among developers to come in and again, execute the vision and goals from the catalyst areas and the overlay districts. David and Fran, you had your hand up, I think, first.
Yes, so I think what we want to do is pretty simple. I think the way to do it is pretty difficult. To me, what we want to do is make sure that any housing in the city of any size, any location, meets our vision and values for what we and the residents want Clemson to be, right? I mean, we just passed a new vision and values. The hard part is, I don't know that you can zone by saying we will only permit buildings that are aligned with our vision and values for the city of Clemson. I think that's what we need to do. And I think what that means, when you look at our vision and values, basically, we want quality of life to be as positive as it can be for all residents. We want to be a community marked by equity and diversity. We want to be a community marked by outdoor spaces. So we have a good sense, I think, in that document, what we want to be. I think the problem we have, and even listening today, is how do you translate that into zoning regulations that fit that? And that means that we have to figure out how to operationalize terms that aren't so clearly defined. So are you allowed to have zoning or statements that say all buildings have to meet the expectations, the values and the visions we have for the city? Or does it have to be more specific than that? Because I think the residents would agree, I think we all would agree, those are the visions, values that we want to see to reflect in everything we do. David?
Well, I mean, you know, first of all, I'm all for eliminating the conditional use in the commercial districts, and I think the PD is the way to go. I like PD as a concept. I like it when it's not applied as simply a zoning or a specific zoning ordinance to a piece of property. I think it needs to be broader than that. A PD needs to be more than just a zoning ordinance written specifically for a piece of property. I think it needs to have strong architectural review that encompasses the kind of things that Fran speaks to, and not just about paint colors and light fixtures and all that kind of stuff. Because as I've said in the past, zoning is about what you do, and it's how you do it is what determines the impact the project has, right? So you just can't. Zoning is about quantification, and it's not about quality. It's not about the attributes that Fran talks about. So if we're going to go the PD route, which I think is the right route, because as a design professional, I like PD as a developer. I think it gives developers and design professionals, allows them to be creative about how they meet those more abstract goals that Fran's talking about, and still maybe even make the project not only a better project for the city, but meet the criteria of the investors and the developers. So I think the PD is the way to go. I think it needs to be more than a zoning ordinance for a particular parcel of land. And it needs to have a strong architectural review component, and component that reviews its compliance with our vision and our comprehensive plan.
Yeah, so David, that's what, trying to get at with the idea that the PDs have to comply with vision, goals, values, character, all of those kind of things. And what the PD does, in my mind, is it allows some flexibility, because a number of things. Our vision and goals may change over time as a community, right? So it allows for some flexibility there. And I really like what you and Fran both said, or got at a little bit, because I ripped Fran off, and I used a Malcolm Gladwell TEDx in my one of my classes last night called Choice, Happiness, and Spaghetti Sauce. And it's about food. He uses an example of food researchers and spaghetti sauce, and people didn't know that they wanted chunky spaghetti sauce, and sometimes you just don't know. And so when developers may come in with a really creative idea that none of us have thought of, but it could still, and everyone gets like, hey, yeah, this works. It's really something that could have a wide range of benefits for the community, fits in generally with what we have. And the PD process allows for that kind of thing to happen in a way that right now our current zoning certainly doesn't encourage that to occur. Other comments?
Bob, this is Larry. I have to run, but I agree with David, and I just want to clarify. I don't believe we should be talking about a PD just where there's an exception of over 56 beds. I think any commercially zoned area that wants to move into residential housing should go into the PD process. I think we should rewrite number one there, because it's a little confusing. And I don't know how other folks feel, and I don't know how cumbersome that is, but having served on the planning commission for a little over 2 years now, I know we've run into some situations where developers have gone back to the basic ordinance, and really it wasn't what we wanted, but we had to approve it because of the ordinances. So if we're going to run this down this road, I would say let's move to the PD in all situations where we're looking at residential use in commercial zones. And I will leave on that.
Okay, so I'm putting that
week.
as the last sentence now. That how do we feel? Can I get it? Fran, could you stop sharing for a second so I can see everybody? All right, so as a committee, level of comfort with our recommendation being that we take residential use off the table of acceptable uses in our commercially zoned districts and have any project that comes forward at that point, any project that comes forward that proposes housing or residential use in our non-residential areas must come forward through the PD process. Any comments, objections? David?
Again, I think the only way that I think that works is if we reduce the area requirements for PDs.
Consider area requirements.
Well, Bob, I think we said this last week too, have to revisit the whole PD requirement anyway, because there may be some other things in there that now need to be tweaked, not just the acreage. So I think, and I thought we said that last week, that the PD process as it stands now and requirements, really, we need to look at that in this new context overall, right?
Yeah. All right. So I've added that we consider appropriate area requirements and other PD requirements as they currently exist to be sure that we're, getting at what we do. So we'll need that'll be a more, a different part of the discussion there. Any other comments on that being really the meat of what our recommendation will be?
And did somebody say eliminate conditional use and special exception?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are other conditional uses and special exceptions, right, Todd? Are you still on here? I think Todd might have dropped off, but we're right now, residential is a conditional use when you bring forward a mixed use project in commercial. So it's just taking that that conditional use off the table.
Okay. Yeah,
Without,
I think
outside of a PD.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I think we
that
need to
works.
be very cognizant of what loopholes we may leave in place and what loopholes we may create. And we need Tom's input on that because he's the one who understands that the best.
Right. And I think that's where we have some balance between what David's talking about, which I get for some areas with smaller, smaller area requirements, but there's probably some that larger area requirements. And again, I think we can deal with that in catalyst area overlays to get the size, scale, and all of those kind of things right in the right places, because there's not going to be a one size fits all across our commercial districts, I don't think.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Bob, clarification. So if we reduce the area requirements for PD, that doesn't preclude someone from coming in with a bigger project, right? In the other areas, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah. That can work as well. Yeah. But you also then, if you're also a little bit at risk, like let's say on, I'm trying to think of a good spot where you also, by having a smaller PD occur, then it begins to, we need to make sure that the vision's right, because you could lose opportunities as well if you start getting gap tooth, a little more gap tooth stuff happening with smaller PDs where you have a larger vision. So we'd have to be really careful to make sure that small projects still conform to the larger vision for a larger area. So almost like, there's a mini master plan, mini redevelopment plan that might include 10 acres. So if you're going to do a 1 acre thing, it has to fit in with how that, what we want that 10 acres of downtown to become.
Gotcha.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, I guess so. I think so.
Yeah, because otherwise, you can end up with, you might end up with very, and some of that's okay. But, again, I think we've got to have a little bit of a water tower view over these areas of what we want to see, so that small PDs will fit in with that water tower view of the district they're in. Okay.
But that could be part of the review process of the
Yeah.
PD, no matter what it
Yeah,
says,
oh, yeah.
right? So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You're in review district 1 or whatever. Review district 1, here's our vision and goals for review district 1. So yeah, you're doing a smaller project in that review district, but it does fit the size, scope, character, goals, vision, for that review district.
I think
Any-
one, oh,
Go-
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think, the design professionals we have on the call, I think the good thing that could happen here is you have guidelines from the city, but the PD allows the creativity that Dave's talking about, and you get a bunch of design professionals, and you get developers, and they're all looking to, reach the goal, to reach the market, and then the city is involved to make sure there's some boundaries. And I think what you're going to find is you're going to get some pretty good opportunities for the city, as long as it fits within those parameters. You're going to get that creativity and some good projects, and not just directed at students. And so I think it is important. Christine and David will say, the more flexibility you have as a designer, whether you're architect or whatever, that's going to help. And the developer is going to be thinking, night and day, how do I achieve my goal, but stay within the bounds and the rules. And so I think it could be something really good for the city if long as it's kept in that box.
All right, any other thoughts, any objections to that? Again, being the meat of our recommendation, that taking the residential uses off the table of acceptable uses under conditional use and mixed use in our commercially zoned non-residential districts, and moving it forward with anything that comes forward with residential uses has to come forward through the PD process, and that we need to work on what that PD process and those policies look like to ensure that we're getting at this larger idea of vision, goals, character, so on and so forth for those areas, size requirements, and some of those other things. Any objections there?
Not an objection. I think it's great. Just a question though. I think we also need to stipulate that the current ordinance stays in place until we can get approval and assent to what we're just suggesting. In other words, I would hate our thing to be in the pipeline for approval, legal and otherwise, when the current ordinance runs out, and then it creates a void in the space of time between this being actually implemented and what's in place right now. So the timing is going to be crucial, right?
This will be a revision to the current pending ordinance.
Okay.
So we will still be under pending ordinance. So we're going to revise the pending ordinance from ban all multifamily housing. This would be the recommendation, and Planning Commission and Council are the ones that will do this, that we say, instead of banning all multifamily housing, what we're going to do is remove residential use from commercially zoned districts. And we accomplish what we really need to accomplish, because those are the areas that super high density stuff can occur.
Yeah, good.
So that keeps it in pending ordinance for us.
So a process question, Bob, 2 points. So a pending ordinance prohibits anything from happening until the ordinance comes in play. Is that what goes on there?
Yeah, until it's either voted for or against that ordinance. Yeah.
And then the second process question is, so what's happening with this? This is it the charge of this committee to draft an actual motion statement that's clear and specific, or is this just this general recommendation document?
I think we do a general recommendation document where we make sure that we outline those things that we've talked about that are important to us to go into that. And then Planning Commission, Council with staff will draft the actual the actual language that goes into the ordinance based on that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I've put some additional notes in this document. I'd like everybody to take a look in the, let's say by, I know this is a tight turnaround, but let's say by Friday at the close of business, if you could take a look and include any additional thoughts or comments, that would be great. And we will go from there. That we will get this into that public hearing. I'm sorry, the joint session of Planning Commission and Council for consideration. All right. The other thing that I just want, one other thing real quick that I wanted to be crystal clear on as a committee, and to bring with new folks on the call as well, that one of our recommendations has been to council that we move forward with the Uptown Catalyst area, which again, stoplight at Allen's Creations, up to Walgreens, and then Kiwi Trail, and even considering 123 Tiger Boulevard redevelopment as well, that we move forward with engaging a group to facilitate that process, to outline vision, goals, and from stakeholders and the public of what we would like to see happen in that area. So I believe we have officially made that recommendation. Any objections to that, in case it hasn't been official, and I will check into it, that be another recommendation that goes to Planning Commission and Council to move forward with that process. And again, I think that's what we'll learn a lot in that process about some of the things that we're talking about: size, scope, overall vision, how that moves forward, and what potential projects look like in creating this new type of development process that's really, that'll be different from what we've had in the past. Any objections to that?
No.
All right. So the other thing that we need to get back to discussing, and and I think we are at an hour now, is the idea of the catalyst areas outside. If we're going to move forward with the charrette on Uptown, that's going to tell us what happens with Uptown. Given that we're making a recommendation pending ordinance that housing or residential uses be taken off the table of acceptable uses, and things need to come forward as a PD. I think next week what we can do is go back to the idea of the catalyst areas, talk about the ones in the plan and others that we think may need to exist within commercial zones and even outside of commercial zones. And I think our next thing should probably be to make a recommendation to council that we think the white paper recommendations about catalyst areas and overlay districts should be adopted officially as the direction that the city is going. So then Jackie's earlier concern about the approval of the white paper is taken care of through that process. Does that sound okay as a plan moving forward? So next week's homework would be to, again, go back to the white paper, review the catalyst areas there. And like I said, Uptown, if we're going ahead with the recommendation that Uptown, the charrette and redevelopment process happen, but the other catalyst areas, review those, and the recommendations about land use and development around the catalyst areas and overlay districts. And we'll have a discussion about those next week, with the goal of moving forward with a recommendation to Planning Commission and Council about adopting that idea of catalyst areas and overlay districts as the official position of the city in relation to the white paper strategic plan recommendations. Sound good?
Yes.
All right. Hour and 3.5 minutes. New people, that's the best we've done in a while. So I'm going to give you all the credit for keeping us on task this morning. So appreciate your willingness to serve, and look forward to having you on this group. All right. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Let me know if you need anything.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you.
see you
Everyone.
next- All right.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Bob.